Hello, everyone. Good morning from here. I'm joining from Shikwat in what we know today as Kamloops, BC. And very happy to welcome everyone to this session of our International School of Radical Relationism. Today we have a presentation by Wasiq Silan and followed and Ben Klasche, sorry, Wasiq Silan first, followed by a discussion by Birgit Popu, and then another presentation by Nadège Nzeyimana, sorry, Nzeyimana, and Ben Klasche, followed by a discussion by Tony Serses. So let's start us off, and please introduce yourselves and your presentation when you take it away, Washak.
Yes. Thank you, Monica. Lokashimukala. Hello, everyone. Lalu muka wasyak shilan muka hunsku kalan ulai. I am Wasyak Silan from the Dayan Nation in Taiwan, and it's very happy to share with everyone my project. And thanks to Monica and Ben for the facilitation and this paper was published as I sent to everyone earlier. And so this is going to be, I hope we leave more time for discussion and future collaboration or thinking together for the future. So I will also time here so I don't take too much time. So today I will talk about decolonizing decolonization projects and contrasting the Taiwan experience and from the Canadian experience in by working together with colleagues, Donna and Frank. So just to put it out there that my main interest is about care. So it started out with elderly care, but now it kind of slowly grow into ecological care and this care perspective from Indigenous peoples and also state Indigenous relationships and thinking about Indigenous sovereignty and how does it fits into this whole picture through developing land-based embodied Indigenous methodologies. So I'm not a strictly radical relational thinker, but I feel that there is some synergies. So I hope through this published paper, there might be some perspectives and feedback from you guys. And then I hope that there are ways that we can work together and think together in the future. And so to begin, I want to thank the ancestors of this land where I'm standing on. It's the Sápmi, the traditional Sami people's territory on the Norwegian side of Sápmi. I'm located currently in Karasjok. It's a 3,000 people village in the heart of Sami language and culture. It's a very beautiful place, and I hope you guys have an opportunity to come over here. It's beautiful. I just saw the sun for the first time in 2 days. It's very nice. And it's a very sacred environment also to be in here. The time flows differently, and it's very nice to start out this presentation together from here. So just to take this gaze from Sapmi all the way back to Taiwan and Canada, the background is that there are many countries starting to respond to this process of like a truth and reconciliation. So Indigenous peoples have encountered so much these harms, and there is this process for more equity and like a different ways of seeing at the past and then carving for future. So we're contrasting the experiences of Canada and Taiwan. In particularly, we're focusing on both countries use neoliberal logics and KPIs, so key performance indicators, to facilitate this particular process of reconciliation and social justice for Indigenous peoples. And what we want to argue for this paper is that this kind of managerial processes do not help with decolonization, but it kind of reinforce neoliberal project and colonization. So the context in the literature, just to be very brief, that we see decolonizing as a way of rebalancing of power relations. And decolonization has two goals. The first one is dismantling the structures and systems that sustain the superiority and the privilege of Western thoughts and approaches, which we are very much doing here in the radical relationalist school. And the other thing that decolonization is doing is to revaluing and revitalizing, elevating the indigenous ways of knowledge and approaches. And this is something that I also would like to do more in the future, and also through my projects. So there are like two layers. So indigenous peoples, we can decolonize through self-determination, like taking care of our own affairs, our own people, through our own ways. And non-indigenous peoples can also play an active role by consciously prioritize and learn from indigenous cultures and values, so we can work together. It's not exclusive, but it could be more inclusive if we do it in a good way. So this is a very brief context of colonization in Canada on the left and in Taiwan on the right. So basically there is this process of colonization through different waves. There are differences, but you can see that the result is very similar, as the last bullet point shows, that there is this like a really lack of power, and then people are like doing bad in all the social inequalities indicators that you can see that indigenous peoples are facing. And we're in the process of seeing and seeking ways of how do we rebalance through the decolonization processes. And I think what is new for me in this project is also engaging neoliberalism and managerialism. I know some of us has been working extensively in this field, so I'd be very happy to hear what you think about this. But from our paper, we didn't have so much space, so we're basically focusing on through the process of social work and elderly care. And like from social work perspective, like marketization, that is marking of the main marking of the neoliberalism of the everyday life is the main problem. And also the privatization of all aspects of everyday life is very problematic. So if we want to decolonize through these neoliberal processes, then it just makes the problem worse. So that's what basically we're arguing here, that if we want an indigenous development or more decolonization, the very definition of neoliberalism seems to be run against to this definition. And then we also see that globally, a lot of critical scholars have really say a lot of smart things on neoliberalism does not go hand in hand with decolonization. So this is the starting point of our paper. And we have three cases trying to weave this together. So we didn't just talk about theory, we also wanted to also come from like the grassroots of what does it really look like. So we have three cases, two from Taiwan and one from Canada. The first case is from the decolonizing KPI, so key performance indicators in elderly services. And in this example, we basically argue that social welfare is a form of colonization for indigenous peoples. So it does not stop when the military conquest or economic conquest stop, but then it kind of continue in these subtle ways through the benevolence appearance, and it's still a mode of social control and paternalism. Through giving this specific kind of social welfare, you continue to colonize indigenous peoples. So we particularly look at, in this case 1 and case 3, this CHS, which is cultural health stations, 部落文化健康站 in Taiwan. It's a very big social welfare program aimed to promote elderly care. So it was established in 1996 in order to promote particularly welfare for indigenous peoples. But then there were some problems that we are just laying out here. Because like there are a lot of these neoliberal metrics and KPIs that is built into this CHS. So that's why we argued the last point here that decolonization was subverted to managerial metrics. And then we counted like the metrics include like attendance rate. You need to be there at certain time, and you need to live up to these evaluation indicators. And basically this attendance rate denied the elders choices of what they wanted to be here or do traditional like knowledge things like in the community. So it's sometimes runs very to the opposite direction to the collectivity and relational building that is very important for indigenous communities. And so the cultural health stations that we are looking at, particularly if you're interested, you can look more into. So we look at the Sakua community of Sakizaya people on the east coast of Taiwan. So the social workers realize that this is not good. We need to really fight against this kind of managerial metrics. So they reframe the key KPIs. So the cultural health station is not just a building, but the entire place. So they try to use indigenous ways of thinking. You can say that like epistemology or ontologies of framing at care, of where care could take place. So from the example one, we see that, okay, so resistance is possible if social workers in the community is aware of this, and then they can fight against these KPIs. And the second example we give is from Canada. And instead of looking at the social welfare institutions, we look at these university-based grants that is aimed to decolonize the curriculum. So if so probably Monica could tell more about this, like strategic planning, about like how do we decolonize. But then you can see there is a lot of this Western dominance in thinking or designing this kind of strategic planning or decolonization grants. So what we are trying to underline here that is that if you see how this online application or this decolonization grants is structured, you can see a lot of hierarchy, a lot of competition and Western idea that is built in. So if you're aiming for decolonization, but then the ways to which that you're going to do is very colonizing, then how does that make everything go? So that's what we are arguing here. So we give like a more details here, but because of time, I will go fast to the next example. But basically, it's just going to give more examples of like the, for example, the inclusion is the most common policy, but there's no emphasis on reconciliation between Western or indigenous ideas, knowledge, and community or paradigm shifts. And I see in many universities, when we're talking about this kind of decolonization projects, it seems to be the case. So you want to include people, but then it's kind of like a one person that you include and you solve the colonization problem. So this is why what we have given example as example 2. And the decolonization example 3 is going back to the cultural health station, but looking from a different perspective. So it's through how the cultural health station in Taiwan for the elderly people is structured. So the idea is that there is this very strong biomedicine dominated reality, or the ontological imagination of what care is, what care could be, that does not have any input from the indigenous community. So it kind of continues this neoliberal processes, and it runs to the opposite way from the decolonization that we aims to achieve. So the discussion here is that we use these 5 elements that are important to decolonizing projects. The first one is self-determination and sovereignty. Second one is cultural safety for indigenous peoples. So these two, we're looking at indigenous communities themselves. And the 3, 4, 5, we are looking at whether these 3, 4, 5 is practiced by the non-indigenous peoples, which are cultural humility, and for not expecting indigenous concepts and practices to map onto these existing Western knowledges and practices. And the 5th is this critical allyship, which is very important when we're working together. So basically, we're saying that nothing is fulfilled in those 3 examples that we have examined. And I don't know if you think these 5 elements are good, or whether we can use this for other projects. It would be nice to hear what you think. But this is our first attempt, and then we realized that it does not really correspond with any of the things that we saw. So just to open up that the finding from case 1, renaming, so they renamed the day club as the cultural health station from the government in the 2014. It was a move for the government to hope that they can be more cultural safety and they can be more cultural sensitive. And but we said that it's more like a Trojan horse, then further imported state-imposed neoliberal processes because the top-down structure remained the same and the KPI remove cultural humility, and they want to they say they want to make it like more responsible, like taxpayers' money is not going to spend in random places. So they insert a lot of these KPIs, but then you by for example, you have to be at the cultural health station at certain time, and I take attendance rate. And this act runs against the hope of the elders. You further strengthen the trauma that people don't think that they have power to decide whether they can be there or not. So it furthers trauma, and this does not gain anything for anybody. And the findings from case 2, this Canadian university case that we find out, is that non-Indigenous academics will join, but it is usually not as a critical allyship, and it involves strong affiliation with oppressed communities and ongoing critical reflexivity on one's social location in relation to systems of privilege and oppression. And I think this is something that like we have discussed sometimes with Ben, and then we're thinking that we can maybe like tease out like more details on like how do we really craft this critical allyship, and how does radical relationalism and decolonizing and Indigenous studies could work hand in hand. So maybe this could be some of the ways that we can start thinking. And from the case 3, that we realized that this neoliberalism dominates the this cultural health station, and you can see that the funding process is how the money is given to these local communities. It dilutes the decolonization process. And so not like Sakua, okay, I realize it's 15 minutes. Okay, so I'll be concluding. So we're looking at Sakua is one community, and Ulai is another Indigenous communities. There are different communities in Taiwan, but you see then, although they are both Indigenous communities taking up this elderly care CHS centers, they have like a different location in terms of decolonization journey. So one of the paper that I'm working on and just hope to get accepted, but I don't know if it gets accepted, is that we want to look at the different ways of indigenization as a way, and using a moral stress as main tenets to examine how do they navigate through this colonization system. So this is what we have in case 3. So so what we have here, that we have think that decolonization can coexist with neoliberalism and still be effective. We are not sure. So this is our conclusion of this paper. Basically that so just to open up, like neoliberalism is probably not compatible with Indigenous goals. Also nowadays, everything is through very, very neoliberal processes, but what kind of ways can there be? We didn't have space for that, so maybe that's also up for discussion. And our analysis also shows that neoliberalism was imposed on Indigenous ideas and purposes, and it creates further problems, and it leaves Indigenous self-determination as a goal further and further. And we need to think about neoliberal colonialism as a further stage of colonialism. So it's not colonialism's undoing. So we really need to be very careful of the process. If it's neoliberal processes, what are we furthering in the road of decolonization or colonization? This is something we need to be very careful about. So that's it.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Wasiq, for this presentation. Lots of topics to be thinking about and discussing. I'm gonna ask Birgit, and before time, so thank you so much. I'm gonna ask Birgit Popu of Tallinn University to talk to us, to give us the discussant perspective. Take it away, Birgit.
Yes, so I will just start and applaud Wasiq. Thank you for sending this Really a tour de force piece, and I think that it critically reflects whether and how decolonization can happen through the paradigm lens reality of neoliberalism. And I think that within this paper, it's very interesting to observe that we have this radical emancipatory project of decolonization, but it's supposed to, I mean, it kind of echoes Audre Lorde's question, right? How can we dismantle the master's house, right? Actually using an emancipatory tool, but still kind of running into the different violent structures. But you laid out kind of the whole structure and arguments of the paper, so I will get to some of the ruminations, questions that I had. So the findings really seem to indicate that decolonization needs to sometimes, or actually always, break the larger systems logic we are in. So you mentioned neoliberalism, but what else needs shifting? Because neoliberalism doesn't exist in a vacuum. So this is potentially like the first question I was thinking of. And in kind of connection to that, do you think that abolition feminism could be a useful resource in tandem with kind of indigenous knowledge, as they both kind of vie for intersectional systemic destruction and at the same time building anew? You know, when you were talking about indigenous sovereignty and self-determination, right? So this is what abolition feminists do. And how do we need to produce knowledge if all the examples here point to collaboration, humility, and respect for thinking otherwise? Should we, on a larger scale, adopt critical participatory action research practices? Is this enough to produce knowledge differently? Or is there a tension, like the reason why I'm asking, is this enough? Because as you laid out, something that we can do, I think within the Decolonizing project is like value other knowledges and all of this. But what is much more difficult always is the aspect that you say that, dismantling the systems, right? So even if we, for example, collaboratively produce knowledge, how can we, fulfill the demand of the decolonization, which is about dismantling systems and structures, right? So I guess that this is the question that everyone is asking, and in one way you point towards this, that part of the solution is kind of this a more complex lens, right? So it's, I guess what I'm also asking is, what does it demand from us? For example, there are some scholars who are now saying that, we actively have to identify as anti-racist scholars because we actually have to totally exist differently in academia and thoroughly challenge the neoliberal institutions we are in. So yeah, these were, I'm sorry, I kind of like flooded you with questions now. I don't expect that, we're answering everything, because part of these questions are like bigger puzzles that I see that people who engage with marginalized knowledges and critical participatory action research, or who want to decolonize the university, those people kind of raise these issues. I will stop for now. I also have some literature kind of recommendations, maybe exciting for you, because you said like, what can I think with going forward? But this I can write in the chat. But yeah, the floor is kind of open for further discussion, and Washa can choose what she wants to respond to. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for those comments, Bridget. Very, very generative. It's really, really good to have all these on the table. But we're going to continue with the format we had decided at the beginning, and then we open for discussion because I think we're going to find points of convergence as well with the following paper, which is Nadège and Ben are going to be talking to us about African cosmologies. I'm sorry, I don't have the title of the paper right handy. Not very organized this morning, but please introduce yourself and the paper. There we have it. Thank you so much. Oh, wow, very efficient. Thank you so much. Take it away, please, Nadège and Ben.
Okay, thank you. I'm Nadège Nzeyimana, and I'm from Tallinn University. I'm a PhD student, but Ben will start from the first slide, then I will come later.
Yes, thanks, Nadège. Thank you, Monica, everybody else. Indeed, you're right. I think the presentations actually do match quite well. At first, I thought they do not, but we do also talk about transformation of breaking structures down and seeing what is new and what we can add on top of them and how should we reimagine them. So there's actually quite a lot of synergy between the two. The paper is quite at the beginning phase, very different to Wasiq's. So we kind of, I think Nadège and I have now an idea what we want to do with this. It was quite a process writing this, so let's try it on you. Our last title is Towards Hope for Radical Relational Transformation of Climate Governments Through a Reading of the African Bantu Cosmology. We are already thinking a little bit ahead of the book project. How can it connect to radical relational transformation? Let me see if yeah. So just a short overview what we're going to do. I will introduce us, our idea, talk about the global governance issues. We see what we should do instead. And then Nadège will take us through African knowledge and African knowledge production, and more particularly towards Bantu cosmology and what we can take from there to reimagine climate governance. Maybe as a starter, I looked at the IPCC report. I'm sure all of you have seen similar maps. There were about 20 to pick from, but this should show the different impact the climate crisis actually has on the world. Yes, it's kind of a globally felt problem, but the vulnerability here depicted through the changes in agricultural potency does hit much stronger the global south. We see especially sub-Saharan Africa, Southeast Asia. Also, IPCC was mapping the general vulnerability towards climate change-induced changes, and you can see that the West, the global North, whatever category you want to use, is fairly safe, and all the vulnerability is experienced in the global South. This is actually theorized quite well. Farhana Sultana is saying, or she describes all of this as climate coloniality. She says that the climate-induced vulnerabilities that we just saw are just an ongoing legacy of colonialism, legacy of the imperial violence that we have experienced before and are still experiencing, where marginalized populations, such as from the global south, are disproportionately more affected by natural disasters. And of course, as we all know, barely have had anything to do with this problem to begin with. Sultana's idea of climate coloniality doesn't end there, though. She says that the vulnerability and injustices we find in post-colonial societies, occupied societies, settler colonial contexts, all of these are deeply relationally interwoven with many other different violence structures, such as liberalism, neoliberalism, as we heard from Wasiq, racial capitalism, other economic growth models, geopolitical problems and tensions. She even says all international development initiatives and also pop culture is something that exacerbates the climate coloniality. So this is the context we are working with. In this context, it's also the case that these vulnerable populations basically have no impact on how to imagine climate global governance mechanisms. They have no impact virtually whatsoever, even though they are sometimes invited to the table at COP conferences, etc. But all the industrial powerhouses are in the global north, and they decide basically what should happen. In my previous work, I've pointed out with also Peter, who is here, that all kind of climate governance mechanisms are bound to fail. We have said this is the reason because no relational approaches have ever been or are really not being used. This is in the domestic or in the national context, but the same applies to global. Therefore, there's a need to reimagine also governance mechanisms to a more relational field, or kind of reimagine it all together in very alternative global governance approaches. And we will hope to find this in the Bantu cosmology. Why are we looking at Bantu? I wanted to quote Achilles Mbembe, this latest book, or at least most recently translated into English, Brutalism, where he says, it is indeed here in Africa that the great questions of the centuries that are those that challenge the human race most immediately are posed with utmost urgency, acuteness. He lists planetary repopulation, population movements, so migration, all types of deborderizing, conflicts around borders, geopolitical problems, the need to decarbonize the economy, talking about climate crisis. All of this is, we should all of this look towards Africa with its gigantic animistic reserves. This is where all truly planetary thinking will inevitably have to come out of. So we're very inspired by Mbembe's work here. I want to look to Bantu cosmology. Maybe very quickly, I don't want to repeat why global climate governance approaches are bound to fail. I want to rather point towards the need for alternatives once more. Here I have one of our favorite pieces from Maya Kwariatsu, where she wrote on the need for alternative global governances. She says, the argument here is that the assumptions of global governance are ontologically in nature, deeply naturalized and universalized. These assumptions are, by the way, neoliberalism, kind of this effectiveness idea. Certain values are universalized, but there's no space for anything else in this. And this is what we are using to drive us basically in the wrong direction. So we need to think of alternatives, she says. We must first denaturalize and provincialize those assumptions, kind of get away with the universalism, try to look somewhere else, and then show what has been neglected and silenced, voices of the marginalized mostly. And then we can reveal important insights in how global governance should actually be looking like. So get away with what we have, on the most radical sense, and look for new insights. And this is where we hope to find these. And I give the word over to Nadège.
Thank you, Ben. So as Ben was explaining, this is the path also to the climate decoloniality, finding that most of the times also when for the African scholarship, we find that the focus is on slavery, racism, colonialism, but there's no, most of the time it's this from these inferior positions, but we find that also there are some of the philosophical assumptions or even principles that we can also learn from the African continent. So as Ben was talking about Mbembe book, which we are quoting a lot in this article, he talks it so well, where it says that Africa beyond all its wounds is the place that paradoxically represents this reserve of power, or has this power in reserve, as you can also see the rest of the quote. So we find that except also these wounds of African from the slavery, colonialism, but it can offer more than that. It can offer also the way we can understand what's happening around the world, or even the solutions, as we're talking about the climate crisis, and especially that the climate crisis is affecting a lot. Africa is one of the continents which is very being affected by the crisis. And focusing on this Bantu cosmology, if we can go to the next slide.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, no, it's okay. Well, for this first, I'm also coming. We focus on this Bantu area as one of the co-authors. I'm also coming from this area. I'm from Rwanda, somewhere. I don't think you can see even on the map. If you see on the map or in the right map, it's small, but it's somewhere in between Uganda, Tanzania, and Democratic Republic of the Congo. It's a small country. Maybe that's why it's not, yeah. So, but you can see on the map that it's a geographical coverage is big. Or you can find it's almost the whole sub-Saharan Africa minus West Africa. And this Bantu population migrated from the West Africa, that Nigeria and Cameroon, but now I think there are some indigenous community now in Nigeria and Cameroon also that are considered as Bantu. So also if you, yeah, so yeah, it's a, yeah, can you stay a bit on the maps?
I'm sorry.
Yeah, it's okay. Yeah, so if you see all this area of Bantu, they are different, of course. They are different. Also, there are variations of traditions, but mostly languages. It's the whole area. It's Bantu languages. Despite there are different variations, the way it's spoken, the different words, but the roots or the way the words are structured are all having a bit the same way. So if we go to the next slide now, yes. So this Temples talks about Bantu cosmology. One of he was a Belgian missionary that he wrote. He is among the first who wrote about the Bantu philosophy, despite having also some critics because it was more from the Eurocentric framework. But he really gave a bit of the foundations about the Bantu philosophy, even putting on the spotlight. And many of other African philosophers have based on his writings just to elaborate more about the Bantu philosophies. So a part of some of the issues of his writings, because at some point he was saying, oh, as white people, it's our role to civilize these populations, but you can find that also he did a good job to talk about this Bantu philosophy. He explains it well, where he says that nothing moves in the universe of forces without influencing others by its movement. The world of forces held like a spider's web, of which no single thread can be caused to vibrate without shaking the whole network. Here it shows how this Bantu cosmology is also more relational and also show that everything is interconnected, as we are going to see also from the next slide. Yes. So starting from this Bantu cosmology, we can start from its languages, where also we find from this social linguistic standpoint of the Bantu, they all have this way of connecting human beings, non-humans, place and time and modality. All are found that they have connections because they are from the roots this too. For your information, Bantu means people in plural. Then there is Umuntu, which is just in a single form. But we find in all the Bantu languages. This is how it's called. In all the humans, non-humans, and the others are all having this too as this self like meaning. But we can also understand that despite that it's everywhere in the Bantu languages, but not in every language the exact wording. There are also variations, but still all have this same basis. So if you connect to this language aspect, and also you see the way the traditions, how they live, how they understand life, there's also some principles. There are so many different relational principles we can also share, but for now in this article, we've already covered a bit about Marika, which is from Kenya, and it talks about generations. And this generation also shows more of how generations are connected from the past, future, past, present, and also how they see the future in this with this about the continuity, about and the links between generations, and what does it mean in terms of to make sure that you preserve for the other people to come, and also to make sure that you preserve from, because you found this left by other people who really worked hard to get what you have today. Then there is this Ukama. Also, it also covers mostly in southern part in the language called Shona from Zimbabwe. Also, it's about relatedness, where also we find that it's about also how people are rated. It's not only, it can be about blood, family, and also it's not only about these small or close family members, but also extended families. And also, you can also be related to someone because you are part of the same community, or maybe you've been also part of the same life experiences. So this relatedness also goes beyond just this individuality or anything that can also feel like it's just about one person, but it's more about many people. And also Ubuntu, I guess it's mostly more popular in this aspect, which is about humanity to others. I am because you are. And as Ben said, it's still like a work in progress, and we still also try to see how we can link this with radical relationalism, as also he explained at the beginning. And we find that some scholars have already tried to link Bantu cosmology with the governance of the country, where this Benja talked about Bantu governance, and also look at it as within the country leadership, how we can also see a country as a shared home. And since we're talking from the global perspective, maybe also we can find a way to link this. So I would say this is initial readings that we did on the Bantu cosmology, which is still ongoing, of course. Yeah, I guess I will still have time. So I will pass on the Ben for the final thoughts, and they're waiting on, oh yes, I still have one slide. Well, this is what I was talking about. So from this is the summary of the readings with the 3 themes that we found that stood out: the interconnectedness of all beings, communitarian. I saw 5 minutes left, yes. And also the interactions of all forces. So Ben, you.
Yes, thanks, Nadège. I don't think we need 5 more minutes. So just at the end, instead of conclusions, I offer some more thoughts or questions to you. A little bit also looking where this work can go to and how it connects to the larger project of radical relationalism, because this is where I feel like we're here together. So I was really, I reread the description of our group, and it's really stressed that the transformative potential of radical relationalism is something that really struck me again. And this is something I'm also interested in when we do social theorizing, considering the ethics and politics of it. What can we actually do with this in the real world, not just on the academic pages? So can we bring in Bantu cosmology, link it with radical relationism and its aim to transform and kind of apply this to climate governance? Is kind of one kind of direction we are thinking at. Also, and I've talked with Wasiq about this very often before, is that indigenous studies, approaches, methodologies have sometimes a hard time kind of entering Western academia. And I have a feeling it will be also similar for this approach. Can radical relationalism, even though we call it a non-mainstream approach, it's still like, look where we all are at the moment. It's still much more established, and can it kind of invite in, can it be this critical ally, Wasiq also mentioned, to Bantu cosmologies, ideas, philosophies. And then I'm also thinking this is one way to decolonize radical relationalism, though of course we need to be careful that we don't just to decolonize it. Did I say colonize? We need to be careful to not colonize again, as Wasiq pointed out. But here I'm also thinking about that radical relationalism, or kind of most of us draw from relational sociology, which has the roots in Eurocentric Western thinking. So how can we kind of open this up for more debates about its roots, what it's saying, the need to decolonize it? Always thinking of Ali Meji, who said one way to do it is to actually look at indigenous approaches, non-Western approaches, and let them talk to the thing that you want to decolonize. So these are some of the thoughts I'm also still like, or we are still like playing around with. But yeah, this is from us at this point. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ben and Nadège. It's really, really generative thinking right now. I'm gonna invite now Tony for his comments. And if you could do that in about 10 minutes, that would be amazing. But if not, we've set aside 15. And then we can open up for questions for the floor. Take it away, Tony.
Yeah, thanks, Monica. I won't be long. I just want to thank everyone from Wasiq to Ben and Nadège as well for presenting today. Really, as Monica said, generative thoughts and very interesting ideas. So just quickly, I'm going to frame this as in a sense in a series of questions so that it's also a bit faster. First of all, I think it's so valuable to try to think about Bantu cosmologies and to try to think about Ubuntu as a sort of a political concept that can in many ways change the way we think, not just about climate governance, but international governance in general, I would say, but specifically climate in this case. I was slightly in a sense, I read the article and I just added a lot of comments. I'm going to start bottom up in a way. I was just slightly worried about the emphasis on, in a sense, bringing Bantu cosmology into Western academia. I hope that in the article, once it's developed, you will spend a bit more time thinking about the transformative potential of specifically Bantu cosmologies and their principles in Western academia. Ben is totally right now at the end when you said that, we must be careful not to colonize again. But then I agree, but then we also have to be careful not to just add, because pluralizing is not just, plus, 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 plus. It's also about radically transforming the ideas that we have in not just Western academia, but also in governance structures, and to some extent also, of course, in policy making itself. And so I'll just, as I said, a list of questions narratively put together. So the second kind of reflection or a question that I want to see a little bit more in the article as well is this idea of Africa. You are specific to some extent in the paper on that you're looking at African, I quote you here, African Black content end quote, in the context of African knowledge, but I still felt like this Africa and the diversity that exists in Africa could be kind of prefaced a bit more and discussed a bit more, and how Bantu peoples, in a sense, how their knowledge evolved from within Africa and its struggles with colonialism. I understand, and we spoke about this, Nadège and Ben, that there's a limitation on how much knowledge production there is on Bantu peoples and their cosmology, and I totally understand that. But I do think that this can be also engaged a bit more deeply in that article, just because I really want us to be careful, when we mobilize words and concepts such as Africa, this also has a long legacy in political theory, etc. I wanted to ask you a sort of a meta-theoretical question in a way, and this kind of continues on my conviction that Ubuntu and all of these indigenous cosmologies can be very transformative for Western academia and international governance. I wanted to ask you if you could speak a little bit more about the kind of the tension between taking in indigenous cosmologies, indigenous knowledges, and kind of appropriating them for modern constructs, such as the international, the nation, the the state itself, etc. And I know this is a big question, so I'm not asking this so that you guys have, spend a lot of time discussing it in the article or something, but I think it can be a very productive question to think about when trying to imagine kind of the political power inherent in, imagine future international governance and the political power that kind of stems from that. All right, just one moment. I have one more quick question, and then I think my 10 minutes will be out anyways, but let me find it here. Where is it? Oh, yes. In page 3, and then going on page 4 of the article, there's this sentence that says, we further outlined that the African continent, so you're taking the whole continent, okay, is at the forefront of the impacts and of, I assume, climate change, and therefore possesses the largest expertise on this matter. Again, I'm just curious about what do you mean by expertise in this context, and how you use that word, which for me is a very kind of puts the local knowledges and experiences of Africa in a very Western rendering, which I think doesn't really go with the intent of your article. And I wanted you to ask this just to help you kind of, or to force you to think a little bit about that. Apart from that, I think this is, I have nothing else to add. These would be my questions. There's a lot more to discuss here. But I also think that once the article also comes to, in a sense, the next stage, it'll be even more exciting to be able to really see, in a sense, how Ubuntu can be operationalized. Oh, and then, one last question for me would be just when it comes to all of these distinctions that Ubuntu makes between the humans and the what is it, the modalities and things. I was very curious, are these distinctions ontological? Are they really kind of separations? And I'm very interested in hearing about, if you know, of course, about how do these distinctions manifest when we're talking about human animals or non-human animals versus things, right? Versus the kind of the non-human, non-living, in a sense, part of the world. So I'm very, very curious if you can just talk about that a little bit, just because I don't know, and I'm curious. All right, thank you.
Thank you so much, Tony. You were very efficient with time, just 7 minutes.
Oh, great.
So this leaves us with more time for conversation with the group. We have exactly a half hour more programmed for this session. So if anyone has questions, comments, anything to add, I'm not seeing hands flying up. So I'm just gonna put myself in the speakers list first. Chair's
we can
privilege.
address some of the questions maybe first that the reviewers raised. Give people time to think.
Pardon?
I was thinking we can maybe address some of the reviewers' comments, and then people can think a little bit.
Oh, perfect. That's a great
Exact-
point. Go
Yeah.
go for it. Is there anything you would like to respond, Wasiq and Nadège and Ben?
Yeah. Wasiq, do you want to start maybe? You
Yeah, I will buy you more time. Probably not much. Yes, thank you so much, everyone, and especially for Birgit for the great questions. I do think that abolitionists and the feminist ways of thinking and their theorization will be very relevant. I myself, I don't know that much about abolition feminists. I know something about abolition social work. Maybe there's something similar, but thank you so much for pointing it out, and I'll put a pin on it, and also started to download the reference that you have put it on the list. And I think sometimes when I'm reading this abolition way of thinking, I get lost very easily. Maybe I don't really have the capacity of understanding the complicated language. So in the end, I just realized, okay, we need to have radical hope. That's it. But then I didn't really realize, so how does that carry from here to there? And I can trace the genealogy of how these complex processes work, but how does that contribute to the dismantle of these structures that has been in place for such a long time? So I feel that it's sometimes in contrast of what I wanted to do, which very practice-based. But at the same time, it's like, how do I deal with all these complex concepts that's flying around? So this is something that I'm still to be reconciled with. And I also think that the methodology is a very important angle to think about. And you talk about like maybe we should adapt more critical methodology. And in my current work and current project, we're trying to think about more of this embodied land-based indigenous methodology that also combines these different holistic and sometimes spiritual elements of the methodology that is probably not very useful universally, but it would be very useful for this particular context because it's a very situating-based kind of knowledge, and it's not good for all the different people, but it would be very useful for us and maybe other indigenous peoples in similar situations. So for example, we are working on at the moment this planting back millet as a way to revitalize indigenous language and culture. And the way we try to revitalize millet is also through these walking methodologies of bringing younger generations that they can kind of also weave into the modern knowledge and the traditional knowledge, and also kind of we want to establish a bridge between the Western science and indigenous science, and also like challenge these colonial land relations, because it's very unrealistic to talk about indigenous knowledge without this deeply polluted landscape and seascape and all this colonial relations and pollution that's in the environment that is disturbing the process from going forward. So there are many different sets of things to think about, but I think to think about a good and good way to move forward in terms of methodology is very important. And the last small thing that I think about is this colonization and colonialism takes different forms in different cultural contexts. So when I'm looking at Taiwan, there is no singularity of colonialism, but different waves in which that they, in terms of like ethnic relations, in terms of how we interact with the Han people, the Japanese legacy, the Chinese legacy, it's very different and play out in different ways. So just want to highlight that when I'm thinking about like a solution or abolition, sometimes I feel that we need to also looking at our own context, not just copy paste from other places, but of course from other places there are very valuable things that we can think about. But I'm still working on how do I strike a balance between developing our own and also like really learning from other contexts. That's why we're trying to build this inter-indigenous, peer-to-peer indigenous knowledge sharing networks in different places. So maybe through this kind of peer sharing, that would be very important in like ocean management, natural resource management, or in like coastal management through participation, which we're trying to build now, but it's like a small, very, very slow and piece by piece. So, and in this process, non-indigenous researchers, activists are very, very important. So yeah, it's like a work in progress. And thank you so much for the comments. And if there's something that is kind of vague, I'm really welcome more questions or dialogue either here or after our program. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that reply, Wasiq. I wonder if there's anything else to add for this, or maybe we move on to the responses by Nadège and Ben about Tony's really very suggestive questions posed for the two of you. Would any one of you would like to address those questions or?
Welcome.
Yes. First of all, thank you, Tony. You really ask us to be precise and careful, and I really like that. Very good. I mean, the last days you've been telling me you hate the word expert and expertise. I see you found it in our text too. I am kind of wondering though a little bit. I see in the context of neoliberalism, and I'm thinking of Wasiq as well, it's definitely a bad word, right? It's points toward the westernization and kind of certain people hold this knowledge and that's it. I like to use it a lot in the governance area because usually there are no experts there either. All what I or like Peter and I have found is that experts are hardly ever consulted, and by experts I mean people that have knowledge in this particular area. So yeah, this is something definitely to work with because I am thinking if we translate being actually a population that is experiencing climate change, disasters, that is experiencing the vulnerability, that is, in my language, their expertise. You know, maybe it's better to use a word that is not infested with neoliberalism. I wasn't. I didn't have this on my map, basically. I am wondering, though, Nadège, if you could talk about the language distinction, because I think this is quite interesting what Tony asked, because this is also something I found immediately very interesting, that there's this, I would call flat ontology in Bantu cosmology, where literally everything is the same ontological category, not just humans, non-humans, and things, but also time and modality. Like theoretically, I can kind of maybe think about it this way, but I struggle to also think about how this is in the use of language. So Nadège,
Yeah.
take it from there.
Yeah, thank you, Tony, for your comment. And we expect also to get more, the ones you didn't talk about too, so we can use them. So for the languages, we find that the way even people live, this language play a big role. So let's if we talk about, for instance, the lack of rain, it can be maybe questioned with maybe some other things people have done. What did we do that have caused the lack of rain? So it can be maybe some activity. So it looks like everything goes in not only about talking about the language, but also the way people live, try to connect everything happening. If it's something in the nature, it's not about the nature, but what the humans did to cause such a disaster, if I can talk about it. And also a bit about the thing about expertise. I would also talk about, maybe we need to change also the way we talked about it, but also there's this way also initially how I don't think it's mostly specific for Africans, but some of the other maybe regions in part of the world, where we find that also there is a way people really take the nature, the forest, as something very sacred. I don't know how they say this word in English, but how you find really how people used to think about trees, how these Bantu people used to think about trees, how to preserve the nature, and also to make sure that what you do, you have to teach about to your children what they have to do, and also to say whatever you do today, it's not about you, but it can also be, it can affect also people to come. So you feel like whatever you have, not only about the people, but also in terms of non-humans, that it's not your belongings, and you have the responsibility to make sure that also people coming after you also will have to benefit from it. So I don't know if I respond to your question. And there's some other comments you talked about that we need to think also to write more about the Bantu cosmology. And yeah.
You can respond to what you want.
Okay, then that's what I want. Thank you. But I've written already everything, so we take into considerations the comments and the questions.
Perfect.
May
I see. So
just a quick comment resonating about the notional experts here to add yet another layer of why we should all hate this word. It comes from none other than John Rawls, probably the most influential philosopher from the United States of America. I cannot recall the exact quotation, but it was somewhere in the later parts of his political liberalism from the 1990s, where he said that in a democracy there cannot be any experts. He obviously didn't mean that there is no knowledge, there is no expert knowledge, but what he meant was that there is no privileged position when it comes to what we as a people or as a gathered together acting in concert body want to do. There cannot be in principle any experts. So just think about that.
adding another layer, Peter, thank you so much. Sultan, you've had your hand up for a while.
Me.
Yeah, thank you to Wasiq. Yeah, I caveat my question by saying that what I'm going to ask is based on listening to your presentation and skimming your published paper. And I wonder whether consulting firms have been involved in these decolonization projects, because what you've been saying is kind of reminiscent in some respects of many things that are being done to a lot of public services, government departments in a number of countries, and also to universities, like, consultants like McKinsey, PwC, that's PricewaterhouseCoopers, I guess, enter the picture and do consulting work at astronomical fees, and in the process they end up wrecking the whole place. And so I wonder. Thanks. So my question has to do with the potential involvement of consulting firms related to the projects that you studied.
Yeah, that is a very good question. We have not examined the consulting firms, but I think they're definitely involved in those strategic planning in the universities. As I could see in the University of Helsinki and also a couple of other public universities, and the same across the world, like with the consulting firms, and especially also this audit culture of auditing and then putting on more of those evaluation checks on the academics. So so I think these seems to be like those pieces like pointing at this neoliberalization and this management process, but we haven't been like using that perspective in the paper. But I do suspect like you that it's this very much is also a making of this consulting firms. But the way that the consulting firms is involved is a little bit different from, I think, Taiwan and a number of like East Asia or Southeast Asia countries, because we are trying to learn from those models of the the Ivy Leagues or these higher in education institutes. So in that case, it's not so much from the consulting terms because we're basically very much out of money and there's no money for the consulting companies. But maybe in the future there will be more. Because we don't usually have any strategic planning, especially for those grassroots local universities and colleges. So the process is a little bit different, but I think definitely in Canada and here in Europe, maybe there are more of these consulting firms being involved. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for those comments and questions. I just wanted to address both presentations in thinking about the project that we've got going on with the radical relationism school and then the book and how do we connect all the dots. And I've been thinking about this a lot. I teach theory, and that is the way in which I think, and I've been very much spoiled by the whole colonial Western enterprise, spoiled by all this education, and often apologize to my students for thinking too much like a straight white dude. And just thinking about our project and thinking about how this colonial project is so entrenched in many of the things that academia does. And one of my ambitions for this particular project is that what we call, I resist calling it Western academia, because honestly, what is the West? Where is it? To the west of what? But
After Trump, there is no such thing anymore.
right? But we call it that for convenience, and because we know what we're referring to. Perhaps radical relationism is the Western way in which we can meet with humility, with compassion, with willing to learn, like you were saying, Wasiq, with finding the convergences, with building the bridges. I do not think that can be done from mainstream substantialist ways of thinking. But if this emerged in some way, and I'm learning more and more how, especially, for instance, indigenous ways of knowing were so generative and so influential in the production of pragmatic philosophy in the US, and then erased, as if they were such geniuses that they came up with it on their own, but they didn't. But that influence has been really generative, and the way, for instance, in which Dewey spoke about the ways of knowing that should be different, drawing on quantum, but really also how that has been convergent with indigenous ways of knowing. Leroy, Little Bear, and Kajet also speak about this. Indigenous philosophers have also looked at that. And so I think that the way in which it can be done is through a Western academic perspective. And as I said, I keep digging into my sources, and I'm going back to my indigenous roots as well, as a brown person in Western, very white academia. It can be very oppressive for many reasons, but that's a topic for a different session. But also not disconnected, because it's the way in which we can perhaps make the connections and engage in more transformative practices that have a point of reference in Western academia, and that could be radical relationism. Another important thing that people talked about was the sense of place, and how that is important. One way, for instance, in my university, we talk about indigenizing the university should be Secwepmatizing the university, because that's the land on which we're sitting. And that's the kind of transformative place where we could be. But even the name university, I keep telling my students, I dream of a time when we speak about the pluriversity and not the university, because then we would be really genuinely giving value and elevating indigenous ways of knowing and voices and methodologies and ways in which we can explore our experience on the land that we are on, right? And so I think this project has that potential. And that's, I think, the place of the struggle, of the fight. And that's my comment. I wonder if anyone has anything to add. Oh, Chris, thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Monica, for those thoughts, which I really agree with. And to build on all the speakers, I just have a question for Nadège, actually. And it's so wonderful to hear talking about Bantu cosmology, because it makes me conscious of how completely African thought has been erased from like my education, and how important it is to change that, to bring that entire continent back into the cultural conversation for, like, white guys like me. And so I'm curious, something that jumped out as you're describing Bantu cosmology, I saw certain like obvious parallels from what I know of, for instance, Anishinaabe cosmology, indigenous peoples of parts of Canada that I've lived in. And so my question is, what do you think might be kind of the advantages and the disadvantages, or the opportunities and the dangers of making these connections between, say, Bantu cosmology and Indigenous North American cosmologies?
I think there will be maybe lots of opportunities. I don't know much about that, but I think if we can find a way also to talk about it and look and see that there are these similarities, it also gives this lots of weight to the knowledge, and also to see that this is something really which is really need to be also incorporated in what you are calling Western knowledge. But also, I don't, you said there's also disadvantage. I don't think now which ones I would think of, unless long term maybe it can be dissolved and be like one, instead of keeping in mind that you have there's a comparison. Also, we're trying to discuss it like two different, or maybe with some similarities. Then that's okay. The danger will be just at some point, the more it goes beyond, it can maybe no longer talk about this North American cosmology and Bantu, but also as one, which also can be not a good thing. Yeah, but I think, yeah, I would love also to read, also to hear about it, so we can see the connection. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
Peter?
May I just resonate a little bit there? Maybe I'm totally off the track here, but well, the thing is that when it comes to the rediscovery of relational thinking in a Western kind of world, especially given the languages most of us have, be it English, be it German, be it Spanish, French, whatever, it's like this rediscovering the yesterday. In Estonian, we even have this expression, which sounds funny probably, tule eile meile, which means, oh, do please visit us yesterday. The thing is that maybe even most of the speakers of languages in the world are having a relational cosmology by default. Let me just give you a couple of examples from my own experience. When last year we had this philosophy and methodology course at Tallinn University, and then one of my students, actually, her supervisor is here. Yeah, Birgit, Iris from Hong Kong. And she's speaking probably Cantonese as her mother tongue, but still she was sort of puzzled. What's the fuss about it? I speak in relations, by default. And the same, of course, with Mandarin Chinese. And as I understand from Nadege's take on that, the cosmology behind many languages is actually relational. We Europeans are just rediscovering it, that there is no object that starts to do things. Our languages are just substantialist, but we have to get rid of the habit. This was, I hate this expression, this was more like a comment, not a question.
Thank you, Peter. It's so important also to consider that language revival and how many have been. It's cultural genocide associated with colonialism as well. So definitely.
By the way, what's your mother tongue? Or you speak probably 10 languages, but which one is you consider your mother tongue?
My mother tongue is Mandarin Chinese.
And Nadège?
Mine is Kinyarwanda. It's like from Rwanda, Kinyarwanda. Specific. It's a Bantu language too.
Just jumping on Peter's comment, I'm thinking that we can think about the work we're doing partly in terms of these massive historical ruptures and disconnections and severings and cuttings that have been effected through imperialism and colonialism and capitalism, and that part of the value of the work that we're doing is rebuilding connections or building new ones, or to repair this damage as a kind of global healing.
This is decolonizing.
That's I
without
think
recolonizing.
without recolonizing, because that is also something
Mhm.
that has been a topic throughout the talks today. It is not, and I think that the way of doing it is to stay firmly, radically relational. And by saying radical, it also implies a certain politics, right? It's a politics transformative and a politics of liberation. And on that note, I'm going to stop the recording because it's 8:30 and we don't want to get this too long. But I invite people